Hi everyone, welcome back to Difference Frames the World, a channel that offers a unique perspective on global events. We analyze big international moves in straightforward words and upload videos daily. In this episode, I will discuss a significant shift occurring in the realm of global manufacturing and sourcing, the movement away from relying heavily on China for supply chains. What does this mean? Who is involved? Why is it happening now? And how are companies making this change? Let's explore these questions together. To start, let's consider a recent directive from General Motors, which has instructed thousands of its suppliers to reduce or eliminate the use of Chinese-sourced parts and materials by specific deadlines, such as 2027. It signals that the shift is not merely background noise. Companies are actively reorganizing their supply chains. But GM isn't alone. We'll bring in other case studies, including those from tech companies, consumer goods, and electronics, to illustrate how this shift is unfolding across various industries. GM has informed several thousand suppliers that they must eliminate parts sourced from China from their supply chains or reduce their reliance on Chinese components for vehicles manufactured in North America. This directive encompasses both raw materials and parts, not just advanced electronics or batteries. It includes basic parts, tooling, lighting, and electronics within the automotive supply chain. Some suppliers have a deadline to stop sourcing from China by 2027. The reasons behind this move are to enhance supply chain resilience, reduce dependence on a single country, and minimize exposure to tariffs and trade disruptions, thereby aligning sourcing with manufacturing and assembly locations to mitigate geopolitical risks. However, this transition is challenging. China's manufacturing ecosystem is deeply ingrained, with decades of established tooling, sub-suppliers, logistics, and custom components. One supplier executive noted, in some cases, this has been 20 or 30 years in the making, and we're trying to undo it in just a few years. So for GM, and by extension, many other companies, the message is clear: we need alternate sources. China alone is too risky. They aim to remap supply chains by reshoring or nearshoring certain components and implementing China Plus One or China reducing models. Let's explore why this moment has arrived. The shift isn't random, it's the result of many converging factors. Tensions between the US and China are a major concern. Export restrictions and supply disruptions are affecting trade. For example, some parts with rare earth elements have faced export controls. GM mentioned these issues as part of their reasoning. It is especially critical for advanced manufacturing sectors, such as electronics and battery production, where reliance on Chinese or China-adjacent supply chains poses a significant risk. Second, supply chain resilience and disruption awareness. The pandemic, shipping container shortages, global lockdowns, and logistical bottlenecks have taught companies that relying on a single source or heavily depending on one country is a fragile strategy. Third, rising costs and diminishing cost advantages in China. China's labor costs have increased, and the earlier benefits of low-cost manufacturing are diminishing. As a result, firms are exploring other geographic options where they may achieve incremental cost savings with reduced risk. Fourth, sourcing, manufacturing alignment, and localization. It is increasingly evident that building a car in North America while sourcing parts from halfway around the world adds complexity, increases logistics costs, extends lead times, and raises risks. General Motors' approach of source where you build highlights this reality. However, it is not easy to leave China for various reasons. Instead of completely exiting China, many companies are adopting a China Plus One or China Plus Two strategy. It involves maintaining operations in China while establishing an additional location to diversify and mitigate concentration risk. For instance, a McKinsey article indicates that Southeast Asia is emerging as a significant hub for manufacturing diversification. A good example is Apple, which has long relied heavily on China for manufacturing assemblies through Foxconn and others. However, the company has gradually shifted some production to Vietnam for iPads and Apple Watches and India for iPhones to diversify its operations. Still, relocating the supply chain away from China is not simple. China's advantages, such as massive infrastructure, tooling, a supplier network, and skilled labor are difficult to replicate. And that is why Apple does not relocate its entire production to other countries from China. For Apple, the strategy is not abandon China, but reduce risk, add alternatives, stage sourcing across geographies. This diversification gives Apple more flexibility, but the company still maintains significant operations in China. Microsoft also plans to relocate the manufacturing of its Surface devices and data center hardware out of China by 2026. This move includes the production of components, parts, and assembly. A supplier remarked, "While moving assembly is relatively straightforward, shifting production at the component level is radical and very challenging, especially within a timeframe like 2026. Technology hardware companies are now facing pressure not only to shift final assembly, but to relocate entire component supply chains. It represents a more aggressive approach to the transition, introducing significantly more complexity. Now, let us examine some alternatives companies have when they exit China. According to McKinsey, Southeast Asia is emerging as a manufacturing hub. The region's advantages include lower labor costs relative to China, increasing infrastructure investment, improved supplier ecosystems, and more favorable trade agreements. Although growing, the ecosystems in Southeast Asia may still lack the depth of tooling, engineering, quality, and capacity that China possesses. Transition takes time. India is also increasingly being considered as an alternative manufacturing and sourcing base. Its Make in India initiative, improving infrastructure, and growing labor force make it attractive. However, India also faces infrastructure challenges and regulatory complexity, and for some high-precision manufacturing, it may still lag behind China in ecosystem depth. For manufacturers in North America, sourcing from Mexico, Latin America, or even the US itself is appealing due to the potential for reducing logistics lead times and tariffs. Many companies adopt not an exit China strategy, but a China plus one strategy. They keep some Chinese sourcing but add at least one more country to avoid being overly concentrated. Many supply chains remain indirectly linked to China, even when firms shift their operations. Shifting away from China entirely is much more challenging than establishing an alternative base. It is noteworthy that Chinese firms themselves are investing outside China, which means the supply chain ecosystem is shifting, not simply decoupling. A key question arises: why is it so hard to move supply chains out of China? This question is complex and has several reasons. The main issue is that China's manufacturing system has developed over many years. It includes specialized tools, custom parts, a network of suppliers, skilled workers, and efficient logistics. Untangling this intricate system is a difficult task. Moreover, switching a supply chain involves numerous tasks, including qualifying new suppliers, tooling, certification, selecting shipping lines, obtaining regulatory approval, logistics, and customs clearance. All of those factors cost. Additionally, some companies that have relocated out of China find that alternative regions are not perfect substitutes for China. While Southeast Asia, India, Mexico, and other low-cost economies are growing, they may not yet match China in terms of scale, quality, logistics, and supply chain depth. In those regions, going cheaper is not guaranteed. Companies may incur higher wages, longer shipping times, and increased inventory, as more geographies mean more suppliers, more management, and a higher risk of misalignment. Slower delivery times drive higher inventory. Even when companies shift their sourcing strategies, many upstream inputs still originate from China, including raw materials and intermediate goods. Shifting supply chains is feasible but challenging. Companies need to engage in long-term planning, allocate sufficient resources, and establish realistic timeframes for these transitions. Moving production away from China may lead to higher unit costs in the short term. It may also result in disruptions to supply, quality issues, and delays in ramping up new suppliers or production facilities. A new ecosystem takes time to come into shape, and substitute regions may lack the necessary high-precision manufacturing capabilities, tooling, and established supplier base. Managing operations can become more complicated and fragmented when sourcing is spread across multiple regions, resulting in increased management overhead. If one has to find screws in Mexico and obtain nuts from India, sourcing managers will be driven to distraction. Let's take a step back and consider the long-term implications. It isn't a short-term fad, as the global manufacturing map is being redrawn. In the past, China was often referred to as the factory of the world for its dominance in numerous industries. However, we are witnessing a transition towards a more diverse sourcing structure. While China remains a significant player, companies are increasingly relying on a combination of China and other manufacturing hubs, such as Vietnam, India, and Mexico. Many companies are diversifying their supply chains, but China remains a major player in production. Moving away from China doesn't mean completely stopping business with it. In recent years, companies have wanted to cut costs. However, in the future, they will focus more on being resilient, flexible, and managing risks, even if it means incurring additional expenses. For example, GM shows how this change is happening. Trade wars, export controls, and national security concerns, such as those related to rare earth elements, batteries, and semiconductors, are no longer secondary considerations, they now directly impact sourcing decisions. As a result, companies must incorporate country risk into their sourcing strategies. Nowadays, products are increasingly being designed for specific regional markets, often with sourcing closer to these markets. For example, North American assembly plants may source materials from North America, while European manufacturers might source from Europe or nearby regions. This approach reduces shipping costs, minimizes customs complications, lowers logistic risks, and enhances responsiveness. Alternative manufacturing hubs must develop a comprehensive ecosystem that encompasses suppliers, tooling, workforce, and logistics. Building this ecosystem takes time, so companies must plan accordingly. While Southeast Asia and India are emerging as potential hubs, they are still in the process of maturation. Despite efforts to diversify sourcing, many upstream inputs, such as raw materials and intermediates, still originate from China or Chinese-owned companies operating abroad, meaning that risks are not eliminated for Western nations. Regions that successfully attract investment, develop supplier networks, and implement favorable trade and regulatory policies are likely to gain a competitive advantage. Companies that adapt to these changes effectively may benefit through faster innovation, reduced risk, and improved market alignment. The supply chain is like a network of roads. For decades, many companies routed most traffic through one major interchange, China. However, that interchange is now risk-laden. It might involve toll increases, such as Donald Trump's tariffs, and/or exit closures, like Beijing's rare earth and chip export controls. Other issues, such as logistics bottlenecks, rising labor costs, and intensifying political risks, also prompt businesses away from China. What these companies are doing now is building alternative interchanges, that is, roads that cross into other countries. That requires investment and planning, but it also builds a network that is less dependent on a single point of failure. For companies that pull this off well, they will have a supply chain that can withstand shocks, is closer to their markets, and is more flexible, which provides a competitive advantage. For those that ignore it, the next disruption, the next tariff spike, the next logistics breakdown might hit harder. China is now playing the rare earth card, which forced the US and its allies to sit down at the negotiation table, leading to a one-year ceasefire. It is tactically a success, but strategically, it accelerates the decoupling with the West. When the US secures the non-China supply chain of rare earth elements and other key materials in 5 or 10 years, it will side with its allies and coerce other countries to stay away from China, just like GM is doing now. What should China do before 2035 to outcompete the West? Please put your comments below to enlighten other viewers who are also watching this video.